So let's start from here and start making the changes. So again, we don't initially we had this room which was more or less a hash map of hash sets, and but we don't have that anymore. So that resulted in us having this number of errors. Of course, the structure of the code has changed, but that's also fine because we had to make modifications to the current setup of our code, and that's also what we're going to jump in and do right now. So the first function we actually changing would be this one, send system message. So this actually takes care of actually sending the messages into the different rooms that we have when a user or when a particular client sends a message. So I like to make some modifications because I also would like to know who is actually sending the message. So apart from having the room ID, I also like to have the user ID. Again, it's going to be of type string. And then I also maybe I'm actually going to replace it with this actually. And then maybe I remove this one. I probably don't need it anymore. So now I have access to the room, I have access to the user, and of course again I have access to the message that is being shared. And now what I would like to do is to, instead of what's how it's implemented here, what I would like to do is actually to find the correct room that I need to send this message before sending it. So instead of this, I would like to do something like because this is this is actually a vector, so I turn it to an iterator, and then I need to actually find the actual room based on the ID. So here I can pass an anonymous function, and within this function I have my room, and then what I'm actually looking for is where this room ID is equal to this room. I'm going to actually name it explicitly to make it easier for us to know what is going on. So this is how I would like to actually find the correct room, and that's we are looking for. And now maybe this part I can actually simply maybe I can take this part out, for example, bring it up here, and I can say let's room. So this will be my room actually. And now this of course should give me an option because I want it to be as descriptive. Of course, we can do a one-liner, but again, I want it to be as descriptive as possible. So now I'm going to rename this part. Now I can say let's sum room. So if we actually have a room, and now we decide what we want to do with this room. So of course here, this would be the room. I can simply say room. So when we have access to this room, then we have our message. And now all I now need to do is to find the people within that room and then send them messages. So I can simply say for member ID in say room dot common room dot member, because we had these members, and then I want to take this as ref. And now, of course, I have to unwrap to take care of this. So for each of the members in this room, and what I will now actually want to do is to send the messages. But again, I want to be sure that I'm not sending the message to the person who actually initiated the message in the first place. Of course, it would not make sense. So again, in the front end, all we have to do is, of course, maybe append this to the list of messages that are there already. But other than that, we don't want to pass this again through our client. So now I simply can maybe get the user ID from the session and then send them a message. So I can simply say if I use the if let syntax, so if let sum, and that is actually when I use my sender, which I should have access to from if I go to my sessions, and then from the sessions I can say use a get, and then I pass the user, sorry, the member ID. Okay, so with this now I can simply, of course, send the user a message. So I simply call the send function, and then I pass my message that's clone, because again this would be behind a borrowed reference. So I can only clone it actually. And why am I not um let me see first. I'm gonna close this up. So sessions.get member ID. I think we might of course also have to update the way our session is defined. So let's see. So now we have our function looking exactly how we would want it to. And again, we can come down to this one. Again, we have to do something quite similar. If you remember, it's just really going to be similar to what we had initially. And here, what I'm going to do is quite simple. So I simply have access to the room. So with access to the room, all I can simply do, of course, like here, I can simply do so it's sum. So room dot id should be equal to again I need to pass the ID of the room as well, like I did up there. And what it means is that again over here I'm gonna have to do the same. So I'm gonna replace this actually with, I'm gonna call this room ID. And then apart from the room ID, I also want to have again my user ID, because I will need to pass this down the way to the next function. So again, this should be of type this connection ID again, which in the end, of course, is actually a string, as you can see here. And so do we have an error here? Yes, no, yes, no, I don't think we do. So, but anyways, of course, I think what we actually get back here would be, let me see, um, 1 second. So what I can do actually is to remove this part to make it simple, and I can use a match instead. So I will try to match what we have here, and then if everything actually goes well, or if we're able to actually find the room, now we can actually send the message. So I can say if sum, if this actually does exist, now I have to call this function, this one here, and but if that's not the case, I'll have my non-arm, and I can simply maybe print some message and say there are no matching room, something like this. And this should be able to take care of this. Again, this should be room ID, and then this one again should be, sorry, should be user ID, and then I'm going to pass them as reference actually, because of the signature of the function. So because of the signature of the function, I have to end up passing them as a reference. And now we have, of course, some more functions that we have to fix. So I don't think we have any errors up there. So now we have our connection logic. Again, this is going to be pretty straightforward. So I need to make some modifications in here as well. So in addition to this, when any new clients connect, I also need to know their user ID, which again is going to be, of course, of type string. And then I also need the room ID, which is also going to be something similar. So whenever a user connects, I need all this information. Now with this information, I don't need to hard code this main here anymore. I can simply again pass my room ID, and because I know the room, and then the user ID in this case, so I can pass a simple string, empty string, because the point is at connection point, I want to be able to tell everybody that someone has connected. But again, if you remember in this logic, we are skipping the sender here. So, but in this case, I want the sender to be an empty string, and what this, of course, indirectly means is that everyone will actually get this message. And then here, instead of us sending the message that someone joined, and what now we can actually do is to tell them who actually joined. So I can use a formats macro, if I can find it. Okay, it's down there. And then what I can simply say is something like this. I can add a message like this, and now I see this person joined, like this. And then in here, I simply just um, pass the user ID like this, and maybe I can actually pass it as, let me see, as reference. because I'm still gonna need this down the road. So now I send this message to everyone that someone has actually joined. And now what I can simply do here would be to like, just like we have it here, I'm gonna get rid of this. I don't need it anymore. And now I need to insert the ID of the, because I don't want you to like giving user to connect more than once. So actually pass this use ID here, and then maybe I convert this to string, and then this is sorted out for me. And now I actually don't need to do this anymore. So I get rid of all of this. So now I still have my count. And now with my count, I can again send my message in here, and now say again, I pass my room ID. I don't have to guess this anymore. And then over here also, I'm passing an empty string. And then here I'm also giving this, if you remember, we are also sending this message and saying, oh, this is the number of connected users. And now I actually don't need to return anything anymore because I know who you are. So I'm no longer generating this myself. So now this should be fine. Again, let me check if we have any errors up here. We don't. So I remove unused imports because I don't want to clutter our space. So let's continue. So now we have our disconnect logic. Again, it's going to be quite similar to what we already had. So we are sending a message that says someone has disconnected, but of course I don't need to do this anymore because I know all my rooms. And now I also don't even need to do this, to be honest, because now I'm trying to remove that user from the session. I would have to think about this in the future if I still need to do this. I'm not sure. But here again, I know the room, so I don't need to go through all the rooms anymore. So I'm just going to get rid of this actually and simply send a message about the user who disconnected. Again, up here, I need those two things again. So I need my room ID, and again, I need my user ID. And I'm also going to make this con ID first for now. And then I'm going to take care of this in the future. So ID, and then here again would be user ID. And again, we can also come send similar message like we have here. So I'm just going to copy this format here. Come on, what is going on? So I come copy this, because again I need to say specifically who um, disconnected. So I can add the ID. Again, with the ID, of course, we have the user. We can also actually make it more interesting to provide the actual user who disconnected. So we can say the name or whatever if we want. It doesn't really matter, but the point is that we can actually do those. So now what I would like to do now, we have our rooms here, and I simply want to return the list, the names of the rooms when you try to list the rooms we have available. So again, I have my vector, and I can turn this to an iterator first, and then I use a map, because I want to use a map to more or less return just the name. So I have my room. So I simply need to return the name. I'm going to clone this for now. And then when all this is done, I'm going to collect, of course. So now I would again be able to return the name. So, and now this should be done, as easy as that. And then I think finally, or more or less close, last second to the last, we still have this join function, and we also have to do some refactoring as well. So again, I'm going to do like what we've been doing until now. So we have our room ID. And here also I have my user ID. I'm going to make it quite similar. I don't want to make it change it so much, because it's going to again be easier for me to change everything in the end. Again, I don't need to do this because I already have my rooms. So I'm going to remove this comment because I really don't think I need this anymore. So now what I might want to do is to get our rooms, and maybe again find the one, and that's this. So of course you have to be a member of this room to join. For now, if you remember, we had these attributes members. So what I can do is I can define a variable, and I can call this rooms, and this would be quite simple. So I have to go through my rooms, So I go to the rooms, and then again I convert this to an iterator. And then when I have my iterator, I filter the rooms, because again I need to be specific. Come on, sorry, I need to know if you actually should be in that room in the first place. So I have the room this way, and now I can call my members. So room.members.isSum. Again, this is optional, of course, if you remember. So if this actually is a valid room, and again, I want to go through the members, I'm going to take this as a reference. And of course, I want to unwrap this, and then I check if you actually are in there as a contents, and I pass the user ID. So that was actually one hell of a long chain of functions. But anyways, now I have access to these rooms, and what I can now do is to maybe actually send message to all these rooms. I can get rid of this. I don't need this. And now what I can simply do is I can say for room in these rooms. And for each of these rooms, I'm going to send a message. So again, quite pretty straightforward to what we had. We have our user ID, sorry, room ID. We have our user ID. We know where we want to send it. And now I'm saying here actually should be okay, so when you leave the previous room, I disconnect you this way. But other than that, again, I'm gonna get rid of this. Other than that, I'm gonna again send the actual message to the new room that you've connected. So I can say room ID. Again, here would be user ID. Again, I'm gonna pass this as a reference. And then the message now is going to say to the new room that you have actually connected. So here I can actually use this and say room.id. That's also okay. So now we have taken care of our join logic. So when a new user joins, we now know what we should do. So now I need to actually take care of these commands, because again, if you remember, we've made a lot of additions to what we want to pass to all these arguments. So for connect, I want to pass, in addition to this, I need to pass a user ID and a room ID. And of course, this has to come in here somewhere. So what I can do first is to maybe go to the definition here of these commands and try to update what I want them to look like. So in here, apart from this, I want to provide user ID. It's still going to be of this connection ID. And I'm actually just going to copy this guy because I'll probably write it a couple of times. So I need here the user ID and the room ID. Okay, so at disconnect, I actually need just these two actually. So room ID and user ID. I know who you are and where you're disconnecting from. So from lists, that's also fine. I'm not changing anything in here. And in here, I'm also going to do the same. I need to know who you are and where you are going to. And then when we have an actual message, of course, I need the message itself. I need this channel that's going to help me send the message. But again, I also need to know who you are and where you're going to. As straightforward as this. So now I can come back in here, and now this should actually be fine. I now need to update the rest. So here I'm not returning anything from this connect logic anymore. So I simply call connect, and then I of course pass the required arguments. So I need to pass the user ID, and I need to pass the room ID, and this part should be fine. And then of course for send, I simply pass my user ID, and then that should be fine. And then again, sorry, for disconnect, I'm going to copy these two actually, because it's probably going to be everywhere. So again, I have my user ID and room ID when a user wants to disconnect. And when they do disconnect, again, I simply pass these two here. So room ID and user ID. and our disconnect function should be fine. So list is already fine. We don't actually have to change anything in here. So the only place we have to change something would be in here. So again, here I need to pass room ID and user ID like this. And then these are all the arguments we need. Again, when we call the join function, we need to pass these two arguments as well. So in here, again, now I would pass the room ID and the user ID like this, and then that should be fine. Again, last but not the least, we have to take care of the message as well. So for the message, we are also getting the room ID. So for the message, we have to do something similar. So in here, again, I need to pass the room ID and the user ID. And that should do it for this command. And then for the actual send message function, again, room ID, user ID, and then message. So, sorry, I pass the room ID, user ID, and then of course the message in the end, and then we send the message, and that's it. So now we again have to take care of this handler. There are some couple modifications we have to make based on the new things we have added. So in here, for example, we need to provide user ID. So this user ID, again, I'm going to take my user ID and convert this to string. And so I don't even have this passed in here. So of course, again, over here, I need to pass my user ID. I'm going to make this a reference to string for now. And again, room ID is quite exactly like, and we have it for the user ID. So in here, I have to pass this user ID and then again, pass the room ID again. So this I'm going to also do to string, and then this should be fine. And so that's our connect method. Again, we have our join function, and in down here, we again have to provide those two informations. So I'm just actually just going to get rid of these ones because we really don't need those anymore. I'm going to provide my room ID, which is going to be of type, I can call this my con ID, and then again my user ID, quite exactly the same thing. So there's a reason why I'm doing this in such a way that it has the same signature all through. So in here I can pass my room ID and user ID, and of course I don't need this part, and this should be fine. So the last but not the least, we have to again go down to the message part. I'm probably again just going to copy this part because this would be, we would have to repeat this more or less, at least for the structure I'm going for. We have to repeat this more or less everywhere. So now again, we have our message. I need to pass the rest of the things. So now again, I pass my room ID. So this is going to come from room ID. Again, I'm going to do a to string. And then I'll pass a user ID. So again, it's going to come from user ID. And I'll do a to string one more time. And then I maybe get rid of this one again because we don't need it anymore. And now we have message. Of course, I have unfortunately skipped the message itself. So the message has to import into, come on, into, and then it has to be of MSG message like this. And now this should be fine. So of course, again, like we said, for disconnect, I'm gonna can paste this one, room ID and connection ID. Sorry, user ID. And then in here, again, I'm gonna pass the same. So room ID, user ID, as simple as this. So just so you saw, just by making the modification to have this over here, we had to almost change everything we already did until now. But again, that's what you get if you would want to structure your chat server like this. Again, you have the point of all of this is that I would like to, of course, give you the possibility to understand how all of this should look like in the end, so you know how to maybe decide what fits better your own use case and then go in that direction. Okay, so now we come to our main function and in our handler, and then here we have as you can see, we still have a lot of errors we have to take care of. Again, I'm going to remove all this um, um, suppression of dead code that I had here initially, because we really don't need those anymore. So again, I come over here. So our chat's endpoints now needs two things. So it needs the room ID, because again we need to pipe this down to all the dependencies. So it needs a room ID and of course a user ID. It should still be a string. And then I'm gonna maybe break this into separate lines so it's kind of like easier to read. Okay. So when we have access to this room ID and user ID, now it's easier for us to actually just pass things down to every aspect of our server that actually needs those information. So maybe the first thing I would want to do, of course, would be to so this part, of course, now has to come from Mm, maybe I have to change this part. So I want to, of course, extract this from our app state. So now I can call our app data, and we should be of type data. And now inside of it, the type should be our app states. Okay. And now we have an error. What is the error? So now with our app data in this part, I can actually just change this because now it's going to come from our app data. So I can simply call app data, and in here I can call our server, this guy, and then simply call the connect function. And now we actually, this function doesn't actually return anything anymore because now I think it still does. So, but anyways, let me update the return type, and then we have to, of course, fix. And I can actually just go ahead and fix this. So I don't want this to return anything anymore. And so this is, and now I can actually just suppress this because I don't need this anymore. So I can come back in here. So now it shouldn't return anything. Again, I can remove all these parts, and now I have to just focus on taking care of the arguments that we pass to this guy. So apart from these connections sender, more or less, we also need to again pass user user ID and no room ID. And so that should take care of the connection for us, and then most of this actually stays the same. The only thing now that we have to again update would be these parts. But let's start from this one. So this would be our message part. So for this part, I would actually like to build up the message body that we would like to send through, and then we can of course then take care of actually sending this message to who needs to get it. So let's proceed. So what we have to do here again is basically what we've been doing until now. So again, I'm going to replace this with our app data. So the app data, we again need to pass this sender to our channel. And then we have to, of course, down here, apart from the text, now we need to pass the room ID. And of course, we need to pass the user ID as well. So this is done. So let's proceed. Now down here we have our disconnect. So let me see first. Okay. So again, for disconnects, we have to pass two things like we agreed already. So again, here would be room ID and then user ID. And of course, this now can come from our app data. And then of course, we get our sender. So it should be this guy. And now this is also fixed. It's as simple as that. And now we can, of course, again, proceed to bring the changes again we need to bring to the rest. So in here, I'm just going to close all of this. I don't need this too much spaces. So here I would like to add, of course, the room ID to show what's actually happening and where you are. And then again, for the rooms, again, this should also be actually fine. So when you list the rooms, we simply call our list rooms method, and then we, of course, provide this message more or less. Okay, so again, let's come to join. So in here, I'm gonna copy this again and provide this should be more or less the room ID, and I'm actually gonna replace this. So I say room ID, and then I'll tell you that you are joining a room. So again, I'll provide a room ID, and then of course I called it to string method. And again, for user, I do exactly the same, user ID, that's to string, and then that's fine. So we are able to join the room like this, and the rest, of course, would be history add from this point onwards. So let's proceed further down. So we go to name. Again, I'm going to replace this, of course, I'm going to use the ID this way, and I can maybe also change this part. So that's when we want to change the name with this command. We also have the option of doing so actually so flawlessly. And in the end, again, we have our message sending endpoint. So we do the exact same thing. So we have our user ID, and now again, I have my send the message, so you user ID. And now that's more or less what we need. So we seem to have some error here. Let me see. Let me see. And now this should be fine. So now what we actually have to do now is to, of course, go to the chat and try to update this endpoint. If you remember, a lot of things has actually changed, because that's also why we've been making most of the changes we've made until now. So I'll try to bring all of this on one line, so maybe it's a lot easier and maybe less intimidating actually. Okay, so now what I need to do here is, of course, apart from sending this app data, I need to again provide the session and the message stream. And then other than these two, again, I need to provide two more things. Again, you guessed right, those would be the room ID and the user ID. And again, you might ask, where do I now actually get these to maybe pass this down into the request? Again, we can easily get those from the path. So here I can define a variable, and I can call this path. So this would come from web.path. And then in here, I would like to receive two strings. There would be strings. So now down here, I can simply do something like this. I can say, let's say room ID and user ID. And this would be, I can simply say path.into inner. Come on, what is going on? Let's say path.into inner. And now I have, why does this keep popping up? And now I have access to these two values, the room ID and the user ID. And now I can actually pass this in here. I can say to string. I think this is already a string, should be fine. User ID. Okay. And so this is actually one way I can now pass this down this. And now let me see what this, okay, this expresses actually pass the entire app data, not just this one, so that's also fine. So I update that to be able to pass the whole thing down. So but now for this to work, of course, we need to update it here, so we can actually have access to those arguments we need. So the first one was room ID, and then the second one would be user ID. So this is one cool way we can actually pass these arguments in, and then they would get through to where we need them to. So now what we can simply do, of course, is to test this server and see if everything behaves, of course, the way we expect them. But of course, before we do, I would have to make some entries in the database to create a user and then create maybe a default room, and then we can actually test with that. So let's do that next. So now I've of course opened, I've gone to the browser one more time. But so what has actually happened is that I created a room and I just called it, like, give it some actually weird ID, as you can see over here. And then I created a user with this ID, and then I can try to connect with this user. And now you actually see I'm able to connect with this user. So I can maybe restart this server because I realize now that I am not updating the count. So that's also why we get some wrong count here for our user. But that's some minor error, doesn't really matter. We may, of course, in the end, don't even need it. That's not so important. So anyways, but now when the server is up one more time, I can try to connect, and then you see it restarts the count actually. And so on this side, I should try to connect with the other user. I think it's ended in 4.2 or so. And now you also see this user connects. But the fun thing now is, to this guy, he actually knows the ID of who joined. And now we can again decide whatever we want to do here. Do we want to maybe use this ID, get the actual name, and then whatever we want to do here, we now have that information. And now this guy can now send a message, as you can see, and it gets through to this guy. And then this guy can also say hello back, whatever, doesn't really matter. And then this guy should also get the message back. So that's more or less what we've done until now. So the next thing I would like to show you, of course, if you see this is really coming through, I'm going to close this. We don't need this for now. So this is actually falling in place. But the next thing I would like to do is to maybe actually show you how we can store the message in the database. And then, of course, whatever we want to do can take shape from thence. So you now would have the option to maybe store the messages, maybe broadcast them and then store, or store and then broadcast. Doesn't really matter whichever way. But again, it would make sense, of course, if you do it in such a way that it's the writing of the data to the database, the persistence more or less remains as it. You don't want to write the data and then not be able to broadcast it, and you also don't want to broadcast it and not be able to write it in the database. So you have to, of course, try to find a middle ground between both so that everybody's happy in the end. Anyway, so I would like to go ahead and, as quickly as possible, show you how we can implement it right into the database, and then we can try to write a couple of messages into the database, and then we can also check it out to see how it works. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, I would like to create a new module, a file in here, and I can call this message.rs. And in here, I have this predefined module for what our message could look like. So in here again, I need to bring this into scope. So I say mod message. And of course, I need to take this serializer and deserializer and then come back in here. I don't think it's important. And now we have this in scope. So what I would like us to do, of course, would be to go ahead and implement a method that's going to help us to be able to, of course, make our insertions and, of course, be able to read as well. It's going to be as straightforward as possible. So let's again go back to our DB. We had in the utils here, we had this SQLite. So I can create a new file and I can call this message.rs. Again, I bring this into scope. So pub mod message common. What is going on? Are you kidding me? So I think we actually misspelled this, so it should be message. And now this one should be fixed. Yes, of course. So let's go to that file. So in here, I would like to again, I'm just going to call this guy DB. And then here I would probably just, for now, to make it simple, I'm going to simply define a function that's going to help us write a new message in our database. So I'm going to create a public async function. And again, I'm going to call this insert. And it should be able to take a message, which should be of type what we just defined, this personal message. It should also take a client, which should again be of type database from our libsql. And again, just similar to the other one, it would return a result. One will be a U64 if everything goes well, and otherwise the next one would be an error if we actually encounter one. So again, it's going to be similar like what we did initially. So I'm just going to copy this and bring that in here. So this is what is going to actually look like. So I have to again bring in the functions that's just going to help us take care of these insertions more or less to again handle our URLs to make it easier for us, of course, to be able to know what's going on. But again, we actually have the option to even decide if this is necessary or not, if we want to have this for all the messages that we'll be defining. But anyways, no matter what the case would be, we have these options and we get to use them if we want to. So for this, again, I added some similar dummy functions like the one we had initially. Maybe I can also look for those, which should be in, say, was it rooms? Think in rooms. And then I copy them again, come in here and drop them in. And so this, of course, I have to also bring in the imports. So this one, let me go to rooms, this one. So copy this, come back in here and paste it. And so now, of course, I need to change this to, so I need to call this method vector to string. And so again, this has to be passed by reference like this. And what else? How did we do the other one? So let me see. So it should actually be like this because it's actually returns an option. So that's also fine. So, but I will leave it as this. You again have the option to actually insert this later if you want. But what I can now actually do is to come to our handler. So I go to my handlers, go to chat, come here, and then go to this handler, and then I come down here. So at this point, before we, maybe what I can actually do is that at this point, actually decide to maybe send the message first, and then if I store the message rather, and then if everything goes well, then I actually then send it and broadcast it more or less. So I can define a message this way, and I can say this should come from, so this should be my personal message. And then I have to provide every attribute here. So I have my room ID. Again, maybe I'll just provide it in everything explicitly like this. And maybe actually might need to clone this guy. So I'm just going to type everything out so I don't waste so much of our time. So I've defined my message here. So again, I'm passing a room ID, user ID, and then the actual message we want to send. And then created that, I'm using the UTC local, of course, to use my local time. And then I'm formatting it, of course, to look like this. And then I add in my media URLs, as you can also see over here. It could be something, could be nothing, doesn't really matter. But here I'm just adding an empty vector like this. And then I'm using the UUID to, of course, provide an ID. And now what I can actually do here is before I do the insert, I can actually maybe try to march the insert. So for example, what I can actually do would be something like this. I can say, what was it again? So let me remember. So we defined it inside utils. we had this message. So I can say message. Let's see if it goes here. So and say db, and then we say insert. So we have our message, and now I need to provide the client, db client, and of course I have to await this. And so again, this returns, if you remember in the definition, it returns a result. So what I can actually do is to match this result. So if everything is okay, and then I can broadcast my message. This one. If everything is okay, then I broadcast the message. Okay, and maybe what I can do if there is an error, if we actually got an error from trying to insert this into the database, then I can maybe for now I just simply print the error, and I can say something like error. It doesn't really matter what you put in here, and then I provide my error like this. And of course, I need to provide the error that is being passed. Okay, so this is one way. There, of course, there are multiple ways you could do this, but what I'm doing here is I'm making sure that I'm able to store this successfully in the database, and then after that, I'm trusting that my app is resilient to allow me, of course, publish this later, broadcast this later to whomever needs to get it. So maybe I bring this over here to make it easier to read. um, so that's really it. So again, we can again try to send a couple of messages and then go to our database to actually see if that's there, because I want this to be as fast as possible. I don't want us to spend so much time. So let's move out to the browser and check things out for ourselves. So we are back on the browser, and maybe I clean this out a little bit, and now I try to connect, and now this is fine. Again, I did not restart the server, so as you can see, it just keeps counting. Again, we might not even need this, doesn't really matter. You decide for yourself if you need it or not, but or if we need it, of course we can easily update this. It's not so much, it's not a lot of work. So now the two clients have connected. Again, I'm going to send this message again, and this guy is going to reply and send it again, and it's going to reply and send again, and it's going to reply. And now what we can actually do is simply go to the database, actually see if we have these messages stored. So I'm going to open a new terminal and go to my dashboard, so to Terso. And maybe I also take the time to show a little bit around. So I just go to the database tab. I have this one called Basilica. So I have this three icons, the icon here, and I have the option to use either of these to edit my data. But I'm just gonna go with this drizzle because I really like it much better. And then if you look here, for example, you will see the messages we are just sending right now. So we're just saying, hi, this, blah, blah, blah. Again, don't mind me. I mistakenly clicked this filter. So it's kind of like sorted the whole thing for us. So if I maybe sort by time, and then you actually can see the order that we actually send this in. So again, this was the database that I had to come up here to create, and this is the room also we are using. Again, see the ID here, just also let you know it's not some hard-coded values coming from this database. And then if we maybe this guy is saying something, say that's a wrap. For example, we can send this message, and then this guy's gonna get it anyways, and then we can come back to our messages, and we should see it here. Again, if we sort by time, we should of course see it here as a latest message. So anyway, guys, that was it. That was quite a long one. I was not expecting it to be this long, but that's also fine. So if what we did, I'm just gonna close this down and then come back in here and close all of this and then come back to our readme. So what we try to do, again, I preview this so you see, what we try to do more or less is to take care of this WebSocket server as we talked about here. Again, remember we worked on a server that can actually allow not just the right direct messages, but we also implemented it in such a way that you can actually have rooms that people don't necessarily need to belong to, but they can just walk in there, see what's going on, and then leave as well. They can also, of course, drop messages in there and then get out. But again, we also in the end implemented something such that you can actually have specific rooms with specific members where only the members can actually send messages, because again we are taking care of you being able to be part of that room before you are able to send a message. So guys, that will be it for now. Of course, feel free to pause the video to play back, to maybe play at a slower rate. It doesn't really matter, but the point is that it would of course be much value to me to understand that this was actually useful to you. Again, if anything is not clear, feel free to leave questions. Feel free to make your suggestions. I'm of course always open to hear what you have to say, to listen to your comments and everything. Anyway, guys, that would be all for this video. And in the next time, we'll try to pick any of these topics. Maybe we can actually start with something like distributed systems with Rust or IoT. It doesn't really matter for me, but I have a lot of things already prepared, like I promised you in the beginning this series. So it promises, of course, to impact you into very useful ways, and you end up learning something you can actually use in an actual job. Anyway, guys, that's all for now. Until see each other next time. Have a lovely evening. Stay learning, guys. Bye bye.